things there is worth updating. I mean, that document, you can tell it's made in 1980. Yeah, apologies for that, but actually, what's interesting about that documentary is it looks at the Mondragon co-ops during the period where they were being most entrepreneurial. They changed their policy in the 90s from supporting start-up enterprises to growing the existing cooperatives. And they did grow very, very rapidly after that as well, but it doesn't really give us clues as to how you go about creating an infrastructure for community development or community regeneration. So, today, they have about 100,000 cooperative owners in the network, which is about 80% of the workforce. There's a lot of pressure periodically to increase the membership. Sometimes it has dropped and they've been criticised for it dropping, but of cooperative networks in Europe, they have the highest percentage of staff who are owner members of the co-ops. In some parts of Italy, it's dropped down a long way. I had a colleague from Sheffield who went over to do a 2-week study trip in Italy, and some of the co-ops it's as low as 20%, and he was incredibly disappointed because he didn't see how they could be co-ops with only 20% of the workforce being members. The president is elected for 4-year terms, as mentioned, maximum of 2 terms, like an American president. And the council, it varies in size depending on the size of the cooperative, but typically it was 7, 9 or 12 people, 12 for a very large one. And when I say large, they've got one that's got several thousand members. They have about 4,500 staff when I was there, but most of them are sort of 200 to 400 staff. They are, what we would recognise as sort of bordering between small and medium-sized enterprises and large enterprises. Big enough to be world-leading exporters of their own product, but not so large that they suffer from the kind of bureaucracy that a university, for example, would suffer from. Yeah? And of course we can compare that. The wage differential did stretch a bit as they grew and obviously much larger operations than were the case in 1980. But it hasn't stretched beyond 5 to 1 with the single exception of the umbrella body that sort of coordinates the whole network of co-ops, where there's a differential of 9 to 1. And there's an interesting story we were told there by somebody who was part of a vote in the largest of the cooperatives where they wanted to peg senior salaries to market rates. They wanted to peg it 30% below the going rate for the job if you were a private manager. And it was voted down by 82% to 18% amongst in the General Assembly. And it was a day-long debate. It didn't take the vote until everybody had had their say. And that set the precedent, and all of the other co-ops, about 150 at the time, all of the other co-ops followed suit. And they continue to grow. It hasn't harmed their growth. But that's very, very different. In America, for example, the labour statistics in America suggest that the rate from the highest to the average payer, not highest to the lowest, but highest to average, was 85 to 1 at the beginning of the 90s and had grown to 419 to 1 by the end of the 90s. So in other different structures, we've seen this massive widening of the gap between the best and the worst paid, but not in the cooperative model in Montreal. And this is on their website. The interesting thing here from the point of view of being social enterprise is social transformation is right at the forefront of their model, the 10 principles that they have. Education, instrumental use of capital, they pay a fixed return for people who lend money to the business. Democratic organisation, open admission, if you're going to be taken on as members, they'll provide the finance for you to do it. Cooperation between co-ops, and all of that combined leading to the social transformation of the whole economy. I thought another way of sort of impressing the difference, or that you can have big differences between large organisations, to think of Barcelona and Arsenal. Yeah, this is courtesy of Mike Bull, who's the co-author of this book. He pointed me in the direction of this. There's an article in the Guardian, in fact, I think just after Barcelona won the Champions League one year. But he contrasted the 142,000 members of Barcelona Football Club with the 4 shareholders in Arsenal who hold 87% of the shares. Barcelona is a consumer co-op, if you like. So it's the same body of law as Mondragon, but the owners are the football fans. And we know the problems that the English clubs have. We also know that Barcelona doesn't always, do fare well financially, but nor do most of the teams in the Premier League at the moment. So there are about 3 billion combined debts in the Premier League at the moment, I think. But the interesting thing here is the knock-on effect on the prices of season tickets. The most expensive season ticket at Barcelona is cheaper than the cheapest season ticket at Arsenal. And even accounting for variations in standards of living, that is a staggering difference. But we shouldn't be surprised. Yeah? If it's owned by its football fans, you can expect that it will be organised for the benefit of those football fans. And we also know that they have very different attitudes to advertising. For example, they carry the UNICEF logo on their shirts. They won't allow corporate sponsorship. They get involved in community projects. All players have to get involved in community projects as well. And we know some of the football players do in the Premier League, but it's the absolute norm at Barcelona to do this. So structure, the enterprise structure matters. Yeah? The social outcomes are going to be different if you choose a mutual model. Yeah? They typically do not grow as fast as private companies during boom periods, but they survive recession much more effectively, and they can continue to grow through recessions when private companies are collapsing, when the private economy is shrinking. So it's very difficult to include them in the private economy when they bear such different characteristics. Now, share capital, I think, it can be a sticking point for people who are talking about social enterprise. How are we doing for time?
Half an hour, sir.
Yeah, I'm nearly at the end. Yeah. So, although Mondragon don't have share capital in a British company sense, but they do have what they call a capital account. They do take seriously the idea that people should be able to build up their capital. And this has been repeated in the literature around co-op social enterprise sector, going right back to when they were writing about co-ops in the late 70s and 80s. That the absence of a share capital structure that enfranchises the stakeholders is problematic for the long-term sustainability. And as we saw in that video, the Webbs, Beatrice and Sydney Webb, they were very, very persuasive in persuading the British Labour movement to support common ownership, and it was also the policy of the Labour politicians in government right up to the 70s to focus on common ownership. But even if you're not committed to common ownership, the arrangements that you currently have in private companies are not the only possibility. It's not the only thing that you give shares to people who provide you with financial capital. What's happening in more recent developments, for example, is providing shares to those who provide the labour, not unlike Mondragon. They provide the capital accounts for those who do the work. Yeah. We saw that they raised money from the community in that video as well, that they went out, the school was backed by the local community, people putting in money, and also the first factory that they created, they went out, had 100 people who said gave them the money, which is not unlike what's happening in the UK now with community shares. There have been pubs, post offices, hydroelectric schemes, wind turbines, where, if not all, at least a substantial amount of that money has been raised from the community. And with modern internet technologies, a good bit of publicity brought money in from quite far afield, people who definitely want to support these types of projects, even if they don't live locally. So the idea of one vote, one stakeholder, yeah, is not impossible. You can have shares, but still have the cooperative principle regarding voting rights. But there will be variable dividends depending on the amount of contribution. Yeah? Even in the co-op group, you only have a £1 share, but your share of the profits depends on how much trading you've done, just like all the way back to the Rochdale principles that they said you get profit share in proportion to the amount that you've bought from them. So there's a different basis for deciding how to divide the profits, depending on how much trading activity that you're doing, which is obviously a good thing to encourage trading activity than just investment activity. So using shares creatively, I think, can create new forms of mutuality, reciprocity, or an economy based on reciprocity of action rather than one-way direction. And there are 4 cases, and this is the last thing that I'm going to show with you, that I think illustrate the way this is affecting the UK.